He hated the sound of a dog breathing in a quiet house. He hated it because he knew exactly how it felt to lose that sound, and he was not prepared to learn that lesson twice. Yet there he was on a November night with the Kootenay ice storm pressing against every window of his cabin, standing in his own kitchen, holding a bowl of warmed chicken, trying to convince himself he was doing this for one night only. 3 dogs watched him from the far side of the room. None of them moved. None of them blinked. And Wyatt Merrow, who had spent 30 years making hard decisions in places the news cameras never reached, could not figure out how to put the bowl down without it meaning something. He had not planned on any of it. He had not planned on the ice storm, on Francine's phone call, on the electrical fire at Vic Dumas' place down the road, on the 3 dogs running loose on the highway in the sleet. He had not planned on driving out into it. He had not planned on crouching in a ditch for 20 minutes in the dark, while a suspicious young male shepherd decided whether to trust him. He had certainly not planned on arriving home with 3 animals that did not belong to him and a feeling in his chest that he could not identify and did not particularly want to. One night he had told Francine, he had told himself the same thing. Neither of them had believed it. Before we go any further, tell us in the comments where you are watching from today. And if you believe that healing can arrive on 4 paws, even when you have spent a long time telling it not to. Please subscribe to Paws of Grit for more stories like this one. Wyatt Merrow was 57 years old and had the kind of body that documented its own history. A right shoulder that had been rebuilt twice and still predicted rain more accurately than the weather office. A knee that registered inclines the way other men registered temperature. Pale scarring along his left forearm where a piece of shrapnel had entered at an angle that still puzzled the surgeon who removed it. He had been a Navy SEAL for most of his adult life, which meant that he understood violence without glorifying it, order without rigidity, and silence without mistaking it for peace. He lived on 12 acres above Kootenay Lake in British Columbia, in a cabin he and his wife Ellen had spent 3 years planning and 18 months, building from the ground up through contractors and weekend drives up from Kelowna. The property sat at the edge of the Selkirks, where the tree line broke open to show a long view of the water and the Blue Mountains stacked behind it. Ellen had found the land first. She had called him from a pull-off on Highway 31A, with her voice full of the specific certainty she carried, when something was already decided. "This is it," she had said. "This is where we go when we're done." Ellen had died of ovarian cancer 22 months before he moved to the cabin alone. She was 53 years old. He had been overseas for the first 8 months of her illness because she had not told him until it was past the point of managing quietly. He had never fully understood whether she had kept it from him to protect him, or because she did not want to be the reason he came home before he was ready. He had not been able to ask her. By the time he understood what was happening, that particular conversation had already closed. The cabin was finished. The view was everything she had promised. The second Muskoka chair sat on the porch, and he had not moved it. He kept it because removing it felt like a concession he could not afford, and because some mornings he put his coffee on the railing and sat in his own chair and let himself imagine, briefly and without indulgence, that she was simply inside making toast. He had learned that the imagination required management, the same as any other resource. He did not let it run long, but he did not cut it off entirely either. That seemed like a different kind of damage. He had also lost a dog, though that loss lived in a separate room of his chest behind a door he did not open in company. Brass had been a Belgian Malinois, dark, precise, constitutionally incapable of doubt, assigned to Wyatt during his final deployment. Brass had found the device before it found them. The paperwork used the word sacrifice as though it were a clinical term. Wyatt had searched for a word that fit better and eventually stopped searching, which was the only resolution available. He did not intend to own another dog. He had decided this with the same finality he brought to other major decisions, and he had kept the decision for 2 years without difficulty, because 2 years of grief had not produced many situations in which a dog was on offer. Then Francine Boulard called. Francine was 71, a retired schoolteacher who had grown up in the valley and still knew the names of every family that had farmed within 20 kilometers of Caslow since the 1960s. She had a snow-white braid she pinned back in the mornings, and a laugh that cost nothing, and the particular stubbornness of a woman who had survived enough hard winters that she no longer felt the need to be modest about it. She had known Ellen. She had the grace not to mention this to Wyatt in a way that required a response. She was not a woman who called without cause. Vic Dumas's shed went up, she said. Electrical, from what I can tell. They've taken him to Nelson with smoke inhalation. His dogs are loose on the highway. I've got my hazards on, but I'm not catching them, and my hip is not cooperating tonight. Vic was 82, a small, deliberate man who wore the same canvas vest from April through October, and had farmed the property 3 kilometers south of Wyatt's land for 50 years. Wyatt had waved at him perhaps a dozen times over 18 months. He did not know the dogs by name. He put on his coat. He found Francine's truck on the shoulder with its 4 ways blinking orange in the sleet. The first dog came easily, a graying shepherd mix female with a cut along her left foreleg. She was managing with the patience of an older animal who had decided that panic was no longer among her available options. She was standing at the edge of the ditch watching the road, and when Wyatt crouched down, she walked forward and pressed her muzzle against his forearm as though she had assessed the situation and selected him specifically. He could not explain why that felt significant. The second took longer. The male was big and dark, shepherd and husky, maybe 2 years old, black and gray coat, the coiled, suspicious quality of a young dog who had learned that trust was something to be earned rather than assumed. He circled the roadside for 20 minutes while Wyatt crouched in the sleet and said nothing, which was the only technique he knew for situations where noise made things worse. Eventually, the dog came close enough to smell his boots. Wyatt did not reach for him. He waited. It took several more minutes, and then the dog sat down and exhaled, and something in Wyatt's chest loosened in a way he chose not to examine. The third dog he found by sound. A small brindle and white animal, 8 months old at most, soaked through, wedged into the wheel well of Francine's truck, as though she had identified it as the most defensible position available. She had mismatched ears, one upright, one folded, and the look of a dog assembled from leftover parts after the more presentable dogs had been claimed. She crawled out from the truck, walked directly to Wyatt's feet, and sat down on his boot. He looked at her for a long moment. "One night," he told Francine. Francine looked at the 3 dogs, and then looked at him and said nothing. He would later understand that this was its own form of kindness. He named them because not naming them made it too easy to treat them like cargo. The female he called Sage, because she moved through every room with the unhurried gravity of something that understood more than it was letting on. The dark male he called Rook, the small brindle one he called Bryn, and he did not spend much time on the reasoning, which was unusual for him. He fed them with what he had. He cleaned Sage's leg with the kit he kept out of habit. When he was checking her collar buckle, he found aluminum, worn, the name Vic Dumas stamped on one side, and on the back, scratched by a hand that had pressed hard, "Good old girl." He held the tag for a moment and then put it back. He built up the fire. He settled the 3 of them on a moving blanket from the garage. He sat in his chair and told himself this was a temporary situation, a rescue hold, 48 hours at most. He would find a proper placement. He was not attached. He had made his position on the matter clear. Bryn spent 10 minutes examining the buckle of his boot with total concentration, then fell asleep on his foot. He did not move his foot. By the second day, Rook had discovered the fishing tackle room and reorganized its contents in a manner that was neither random nor useful. Sage had taken up permanent residence in front of the wood stove with the settled authority of someone who had always lived there, and was simply waiting for the rest of the household to acknowledge it. And Bryn had found the bathroom. Specifically, Bryn had found Ellen's bathtub. It was a freestanding soaker, white porcelain, gold fixtures that Ellen had driven to Kelowna 3 times to select correctly. She had wanted it from the first sketch of the floor plan. Wyatt had never questioned the purchase because the look on her face when she found it was not the kind of look a person negotiates with. The tub had been used exactly twice before the stairs became too difficult. Wyatt had not used it once. He had not changed anything about the bathroom. He was not sure what he was waiting for. He found Bryn sitting in the center of it, watching the frost-edged window, her tail thumping twice against the porcelain when she noticed him. The sound bounced off the tile walls in a way that was very loud in a house that had been very quiet. Wyatt stood in the doorway. Then he sat down on the floor with his back against the wall. He sat there for a long time, and Bryn sat in the tub looking at him with her mismatched ears at two different angles, and neither of them moved, and it was not the worst thing that had happened in that house, which was something. He lost his temper on the fourth day. He had been expecting it the way you expect weather when the pressure has been building for a week. Not sudden, not surprising, just the eventual arrival of something that had been coming. Rook found the box. It was on the upper shelf of the bedroom closet, a cardboard box in Ellen's handwriting, not a rush. She had written that phrase on a dozen boxes during the move, distinguishing them from the ones that needed unpacking immediately. This one had never been opened. Wyatt knew what was in it. He had not been able to touch it. He came in from splitting wood to find Rook in the bedroom doorway holding one of Ellen's scarves in his mouth, not destroying it, not chewing it, just carrying it with the quiet pride of a dog who had found something of value. It was a blue and gray wool scarf, lightweight, the kind she wore in October. She had worn it the last autumn she was well enough to walk the property. She had worn it the afternoon they stood at the edge of the eastern field, and she said, "I want bird feeders out here, about 6 of them. Don't argue." Something in Wyatt went from controlled to not controlled in the space of a breath. He crossed the room and took the scarf from Rook's mouth and shoved the dog toward the door with more force than was warranted. Not enough to hurt, but enough. He knew the difference. He had always known the difference, and knowing it did not make him feel better about the moment. Rook went. Sage followed. He closed the door. He stood in the bedroom with the scarf in both hands until the feeling in his chest stopped being the kind that moved upward and became the kind that settled. When he pulled the curtain aside, Rook was on the porch in the cold facing the yard, still, not running, not hiding, just there. Sage was beside him, her shoulder touching his, and then the mudroom window, left cracked 2 inches for air, opened wider, and Bryn squeezed through a gap that should not have accommodated her, dropped to the porch deck, crossed to the front door, and sat down facing in. She was not asking to come in. She was waiting for him. Wyatt pressed his palm against the cold glass. He opened the door. The call from the hospital came 6 days later. Vic Duma had suffered a stroke the night of his admission and would not recover enough to return home. His daughter was coming from Ontario to manage his affairs. The dogs were Vic's property and would need to be placed. The daughter sounded tired in the way people sound when grief and logistics are arriving simultaneously, and neither one is making room for the other. She said she was grateful. She said the word rescue in the tone of a woman working through a list. Wyatt said he would handle it. He drove to Caslow for proper food, a proper bed, a collar for Rook that fit. He spent 40 minutes in the pet supply aisle reading bag panels with the same attention he had once given to mission briefings, which struck him as both slightly absurd and entirely appropriate. He came home to find all 3 of them sitting by the front door in the cold. Not because the door was locked, because it wasn't, but because they had come outside to wait for him. Rook in the center, Sage to his left, Bryn between them, too small to block much but present. Wyatt stood at the truck for a moment, bags in hand. "All right," he said, not to them exactly, to something. Spring came late to the Kootenay, that year, the mountains still white into April. The lake cold enough that the morning mist lay flat across the water until 9 o'clock. Wyatt took the dogs to the farmer's market in Caslow on a bright Saturday because they needed socialization, and he needed a reason to leave the property that was not the grocery run. He wore a clean flannel shirt and his good boots and spent more time than usual in the mirror without being able to say precisely why. The 3 of them walked beside him with the composure of dogs who had spent 5 months learning what was expected, which was to say they were largely excellent and occasionally catastrophic, and both categories were improving. An older man stopped to photograph Rook with his phone. Two small children sat down on the gravel immediately upon meeting Bryn and included her in whatever they were doing, which she accepted as her natural right. The woman appeared near the honey stalls, dressed too expensively for a Kootenay farmer's market, with the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to being taken seriously in commercial conversations. She introduced herself as Camille and completed the introduction while looking at Rook with a particular quality of attention. The attention of calculation rather than admiration. "Husky shepherd," she said. "Good bone structure, good drive. I run a sled operation out of the boundary country. Working dogs need work." She named a number. It was not a small number. Rook shifted his weight backward until his shoulder pressed against Wyatt's leg. Wyatt looked down at him. He thought about Brass the morning of the last mission, the quick check-in at Wyatt's hand before they moved out, the look that said everything is in order, I'm with you. He thought about what it meant to be somebody's person, and what that cost, and what it was actually worth in any accounting that mattered. "He's not for placement," Wyatt said. Camille adjusted her expression toward Patience. "He's 2 years old. A dog like this needs purpose." "He has one," Wyatt said. He looked down at Rook, who was already watching the next stall with his unhurried amber gaze, as though the conversation had been a minor administrative matter and was now closed. "He just works for me." A woman nearby laughed, quick and genuine, the kind that happens before a person decides whether to. Camille said something polite and departed. Sage sneezed. Bryn sat on Wyatt's boot. He stood there in the April sunlight with the three of them around him and felt something he had not felt in a very long time, which was the specific quality of being where he was supposed to be, among the people, among the souls he was supposed to be with. The river came fast in early May. The snowmelt that year was sudden, and the creek along the south edge of the property climbed its banks in less than 2 days, pushing water into the cedar roots and over the lower trail. Wyatt had managed flood conditions before. He had a system. He was not concerned. Then Bryn saw the duck. It was a mallard female, settled on a debris float in the main current, apparently undisturbed by the situation around her. Bryn had been beside Wyatt's knee one moment, and in the air the next, launching herself off the bank with the complete certainty of an animal who had not yet learned that moving water does not make exceptions. The current had her immediately. Rook went in without a sound. His shoulder, the one he had wrenched on a porch step in January, had to have been firing with pain. He did not let it slow him. He angled into the current toward Bryn's struggling form with the focused economy of movement that Wyatt recognized from his own training. No panic, no wasted motion, just the assessment and the action. Wyatt went in after both of them. The snowmelt off the Selkirks hits like a decision being made for you. He gasped on contact and pushed through it, found Bryn by her collar 20 meters downstream, pulled her against his chest. Rook was already angling back toward the bank on his own. Sage was running the bank in parallel, barking in short, measured bursts. Not in panic, in direction. She stopped at a place where the current bent inward near a gravel bar, and that was the place where they got out. Francine, driving past on the highway above, had seen the motion from her truck. She was down the bank with a rope from her toolbox, before Wyatt had finished standing. Because she was from the Kootenay Valley and everyone had a rope, and she had always known, without being able to explain it, that this particular neighbor was going to need one eventually. He sat on the gravel with Bryn in his arms and Rook pressed against his side, and the four of them dripped and breathed together, and Sage walked back and forth in front of them completing her inspection. Francine picked her way down carefully, mindful of her hip. "I won't say I told you so," she said. "You didn't tell me anything." "No," she agreed, "but I thought it very loudly back in November several times." Summer arrived in the Kootenay with the particular green extravagance of a place that had spent 6 months under snow and was not modest about the recovery. The lake turned the color of deep glass. The cedar smell came back into the air. Wyatt's property, which had spent a winter feeling like a position being defended, began to feel like something else. Something he did not have a word for yet, but which he recognized the way he recognized the shift in a room when the tension goes out of it. Rook slept across the front door. Sage stayed close to his knee in the evenings, near enough to touch, never demanding it. Bryn had claimed the second Muskoka chair with such complete absence of apology that Wyatt had stopped thinking of it as Ellen's chair, and started thinking of it as Bryn's chair, which was a shift he noticed without fully accounting for. One evening in late July he stood at the open closet and held Ellen's blue and gray scarf. He thought about what she would have said about the dogs. He knew precisely. She would have said, "See?" with the expression she wore when she had been right about something for a long time, and was being gracious enough not to labor the point. She had told him he needed something to come home to, in the way that people say things they mean more seriously than they let on. He had been overseas when she said it, and overseas when she got sick, and home too late, and then alone. He folded the scarf and put it on the shelf where he could see it from the door. Then he went back to the living room, where the fire was going, and the three of them were arranged around the room in their particular ways. Rook at the threshold, Sage near his chair, Bryn entirely occupying the Muskoka, and he sat down. Francine had said, back in the spring, "Nobody plans it, that's the whole point." He still did not have an answer to that, but he sat with Rook's weight against his shin and the Kootenay dark pressing softly against the windows, and 3 dogs breathing in the room around him, and the cabin that had spent 22 months, feeling like a promise with nobody left to keep it felt, in some quiet and unannounced way, like the thing Ellen had called it that afternoon on the highway pull-off, her voice certain, and the lake blue behind her. Home. He had arrived here alone. He had not remained that way. And some mornings, when the mist was still lying flat across the water, and Bryn was in the Muskoka watching the cedar shadows move, and Rook was already at the door, and Sage was close to his knee, he thought that was probably what she had meant all along. Not a place, not silence, not the view, though the view was everything she had promised. The people, the souls, the breathing presences that made a place a home rather than a location. He just hadn't known, when she said it, what form they were going to take. If this story found you tonight, leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Tell us about an animal that arrived when you were not looking, and changed something that had stopped working. And if you believe that the heart can still be reached, that loyalty can still find a door even when it's been locked for a long time, subscribe to Paws of Grit for more stories like this one. May you be found by the right soul, at the right moment, in exactly the season you need it most.